On Sunday night, a week out from the fights, it was announced by Terrance McKinney and the Schmo that out was Chris Duncan from the originally scheduled matchup, and in is the kid, Brendon Marotte, a big-time name out of the Northeast. And Matt, when you look at a fight like this, I mean, people know Brendon Marotte's gym, right? They're going to know Tyson Chartier, New England Cartel, Rob Font, sure. Calvin Kattar, and they're going to wonder, is Brendon Marotte a Calvin Kattar, Rob Font, or is he a Nick Fiore or like a Chris Mutino? And that's going to be a big talking point for this fight. But when you do look at it for both of these guys, and for Brendon Marotte in particular, I feel like we had a fight similar to this matchup on last weekend's main card, UFC Vegas 80. We kind of joked around about it because every now and again you get fighters that fight outside of the rankings and you pitter-patter on over to Topology and you see where they're ranked in the overall landscape of things. Terrance McKinney,
Drew Dober,
tentatively ranked the 34th lightweight in the world. And that's every major organization. They throw them all together. So, hell, AJ McKee could be higher than that.
That seems a little generous to me.
But McKinney ranked 34th on Topology. Brendon Marotte, 24th ranked lightweight in the U.S. Northeast.
It's a very specific area.
The barrel, we're near the bottom. Now! That's rude because it doesn't do Brendon Marotte justice. And I went back and I listened to an interview that he did with The Room and Steven Domenico. He's always interviewing fighters out of New England. And Steve himself has a very, very New England accent. So what I learned about Brendon Marotte, if you go through his career, there's bits and pieces of layoffs, right? Because he loses to Adley Edwards and you wonder, okay, Adley Edwards ended up having some big fights with Bellator. Where did Chris go? Well, he took the time off. He fights Dan Dubuque. He wins a split decision. I thought he could have lost that fight. And if you listen to that interview, he says, well, when he fought Dan Dubuque, he had a little bit of respiratory infection, had a hard time breathing going into that one. So he took about 2 years off between the Dubuque split decision win and then fighting Dion Rubio. He goes out there, gets a TKO win pretty quick. And then not that long ago, back in August, he takes on Lionel Young, gets the win.
What was Lionel's record, Craig?
31 men have tried. 20 have succeeded. Now, Lionel Young, yes, is an 11-20 fighter. He has losses in his career to Rob Font, Jay Perrin, Tom Pagliarulo, who I think is going to be in the UFC at some point, Peter Barrett, and Sachan Soriano. So some big names. That's what, like 6 guys out of 20. So
most guys in the regional scene would lose to those 6.
But 11 he was able to beat. But when you go back and you watch that fight, Lionel Young looks like he's going to have some success in the grappling. And then all of a sudden, out of the ashes, Brendon Marotte's able to switch position after spending most of the first round on the mat. He ends up getting the win by rear naked choke. So now, even though this fight's on short notice, Matt, I threw it out there, and again, being a little bit cheeky with some of these graphics because we don't know what Brendon Marotte's reach actually is. I put for his style, hybrid. His boxing's pretty good. It's gotten better as his career's gone on. I think his wrestling's pretty good for a guy coming in off the regional scene. And
it's a little loose, but it's not bad.
The biggest thing for Brendon Marotte is, and I'll throw a picture up there, he was on the last episode of Dana White's Looking for a Fight. Looking for a Fight Boston, that Combat Zone 79 card that was taking place. And obviously, you saw Connor Matthews getting the marquee and a lot of notoriety, and they didn't even sign him into the UFC. They put him on Contender Series again. But Brendon Marotte featured in clips and bits and pieces. Now you're taking on Terrance McKinney. And you know how good of a wrestler he was. He went up, through, and then down as his wrestling career went on in college, university, so to speak. And for Terrance McKinney, the performances have been up and down, but his last time out, he took on Money Mike Breeden. I was putting a kayak on the back of the Subaru when I was talking about that fight by myself, and McKinney, 30-1, the significant strikes, and absolutely dismantled Mike Breeden by hitting him with a tough left hook to the body, and then he had him all sorts of confused on Beach Street, through a knee, and that was the beginning of the end. So, a giant performance by McKinney, not that long ago, back in August, and now you get this short notice thrown together fight where Brendon Marotte doesn't necessarily fight like Chris Duncan either.
He definitely doesn't. Terrance McKinney to me feels a little bit like Cam Reddish, to a certain degree, just because there was a lot of hype initially, right?
Well, there was.
Hey, this guy is going to come in, be a transformative star, perhaps, and I don't think Terrance McKinney is a bad fighter by any means. I know the results haven't necessarily been where the expectations were placed, but the expectations were placed quite high, and I don't think you can completely write off the fighter just because they weren't able to completely, satisfy what the masses thought they were, because McKinney, like you say, he still does have the wrestling in his back pocket. He's still still can land extremely heavy shots down the middle. The guy can bang at 155. Like, if he lands clean on your chin, there is not a ton of guys in this division who can withstand it. And this is the big question I have about Marotte, especially in the UFC. He does have a tendency to leave his hands floating a little bit. And we talk about this a lot, right? You can have your hands out very far, and to a certain degree, it'll help you defend things like overhands because it will help shield that shot coming over the top. But for straight shots down the middle, that's not necessarily the best striking defense to have. And Marotte does an okay job moving his feet. He kind of does have that kind of stutter, kind of half shift to his style. But if he does have that striking defense at the UFC level, and maybe he will continue to fight at 145 after this matchup, maybe this is what we see a lot of guys do in their debut. You kind of have that one fight above your natural weight class, kind of get it in to get your foot in the door, and then we'll see you move back down.
Like your David Onama.
Benoit Saint Denis is always the guy who comes to mind just because his 170 debut went disastrous, but he has looked a lot better since he's gone down to his natural division. I just think for Marotte, that striking defense does worry me against a guy like McKinney, who, yes, for all the faults in his game, and yes, we can bring up quite a few of them, the guy lands pretty good shots down the middle, and he can land accurate ones at that too. And if Marotte does try to go in there and use some of his own offensive boxing to match what Terrance McKinney can do on the feet, unless he lands a massive overhand early in this fight that can really change the complexion of the whole entire thing, I do think McKinney's the much more accurate striker from that position, even if he is moving backwards, because that's the difference between these guys. McKinney, when he's moving forward, he's a threat to knock you out, but he can still land power shots down the middle when he is on the retreat. I know we've seen him get clipped in that spot too, but he can still land if he's forced to move backwards.
McKinney's big trouble is when he tries to land a lot of those power shots, he squares up and he's able to get countered. And when you look at a guy like Marotte, he can land those counter shots. You've seen it in his matchups. He's a guy that walks out to Missile by Dorothy. I'd say underrated banger, but I'm not a big fan. It's like walking out to I'm Only Human after all. Like you're Rafael Fiziev. And there's a guy on this card that I think has a Rafael Fiziev tattoo, so we're going to talk about that. But for Terrance McKinney, you gain the advantage of being a southpaw in this fight. You gain the advantage of you're getting ready for this fight. Both these guys are going to be long for the weight class, even not knowing what Marotte's reach is. He's 5'10", so he should fill out pretty well. And Terrance McKinney, he's a guy that's fought at featherweight in the past as well, so keep that one in mind. McKinney, the Dana White's Contender Series vet, popping up from that takedown attempt, Sean Woodson. Shut your lights out. But when you look at it for McKinney, this is my biggest thing. He was 4-3 at featherweight, 8-3 at lightweight, 1-0 at a catchweight of 160, and 1-0 at welterweight when McKinney fought there the one time. But this is the biggest part. In 8 UFC fights total for McKinney, his strikes landed to the head, the body, and the legs. To the head, 94. To the body, 25. To the legs,
I'm guessing low.
Goose egg. Terrance McKinney doesn't throw kicks, so if Brendon Marotte's able to go in there, go tit for tat, defend some of those big action strikes in the first round, Marotte could take over as this fight goes late, because we have seen Marotte fight past the first round. He's not like he's one of these guys coming in with, 8 first-round finishes out of 8 wins.
Should Terrance McKinney add, like, the Yoel Romero hammer fist to the thigh to his repertoire, perhaps?
People might like that.
An underrated tool at MMA.
They might like that. But when you do consider it overall, again, another reason for the layoff for Marotte, he started a cafe chain with his wife. A cafe chain.
Good for them.
So check that out. It's called Balance Cafes.
Shout out.
In around the New Hampshire area. And this is a nugget. If you're hanging out with your friends on Saturday, you're going to go, Craig and Matt, they told me this. I did a deep dive because I thought, all right, Maine, they've got the Irish Hand Grenade, Marcus Davis, they've got Devin Powell, Massachusetts got all sorts of fighters, Connecticut's had some, Vermont.
Tim Sylvia?
Not really a big time. Tim Sylvia out of
Maniac?
Ellsworth, Maine, but not a lot of fighters
Tim Boach?
out of Vermont. How many fighters out of New Hampshire can you think of? Because I didn't find a single UFC fighter out of New Hampshire.
It's a beautiful area.
Listen, Devin Powell fought out of Maine when he was in the UFC, but his gym Nostos is just across the border in New Hampshire, so it doesn't really count. So this could be the first New Hampshire fighter in the UFC, and Brendon the Kid Marotte. Matt, I assume Terrance McKinney is a giant, juiced up, massive favorite. We don't have odds on this one. It was thrown in on incredibly short notice. We have a look at the Topology votes. Price us there to you. I'm not even going to make you guess. 94% of the fans going with McKinney, 80% by knockout for the 6% that are Marotte, 50% by knockout. Marotte's only lost to Adley Edwards, and Marotte said in that interview on the Room podcast with Steve Domenico that there were offers to fight on Contender Series back then, and instead they signed up to fight Adley Edwards, who went on to beat Marotte and then fight with Bellator. So a tough one there, but he's obviously built things back up and a successful bit of cafes.
Good for them. I love me a nice cafe. I have Terrance McKinney in this matchup, and again, Do you know what show I really like? I like this show called Rust Valley Restorers. It's about these
I do
guys.
too.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Buddy's got dumb hair, and his
Mike?
friend. Yeah, Mike's got some dumb hair, but it's basically a show.
Hold on, his friend looks like if Mario was a porn star in the 70s and kept just ripping and tearing.
Oh, for sure.
But it's a good show.
My
I'm not
point
kidding.
is, though, the whole show is about these guys in British Columbia who have a lot of old cars and a big, rust yard, and they fix them up. Terrance McKinney might not be that sports car that everybody thought he was, right? That everybody initially assumed. But there is still some good parts about his game that I don't think you can completely throw out, and that's why I think he's going to win this.
Matt, you didn't
Shout
watch
out Rust Valley Restorers.
You didn't watch the video I made by myself when I was putting the kayak on top of the car, and I said Terrance McKinney was like an old chainsaw that you inherited. That maybe the carburetor's busted, but it'll still chop wood when you need it to.
There you go.
So Matt, I do have Terrance McKinney in the matchup. I think the kicks are going to be the big difference maker. And again, when he took on a guy who had similar skills, Mike Breeden, better boxer than Brendon Marotte, but all in all, Breeden fought Marotte. I think it'd be a close fight, actually. McKinney just blitzed him, and he threw the kitchen sink at his body, which isn't a big thing, as I pointed out, that McKinney does. But a lot of those big head kicks, a lot of the kicks to the body, left hook, and that was what kind of finished things. And once he got in tight, Marotte's got a decent clinch, but he's been overpowered by some of these guys. Lionel Young's one of those fighters. Again, the overall combined record for Brendon Marotte out of the wins and the losses, 32-36. But obviously it's weighted by 11-20 Lionel Young. So for me, I do like Terrance McKinney in the fight. But I think this is going to be an exciting one. And I think Brendon Marotte's going to get a big showcase and a good welcome into the UFC. And the fans, I can see them rallying around him here in the Northeast. So Matt, a big-time matchup on this card. Both of us with T.Wrecks, Terrance McKinney to get the win. We get some big-time fights in this card. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.